Hi there, Nathan Pierce here with Family Protection Ministries. We're going to be talking today a little bit about some things going on in the California legislature, but also we're going to touch on a couple of topics related to the battle going on for homeschool freedom in Brazil. A family that has been separated, parents put in prison for 50 days for intellectual neglect. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Front Line with FPM, where we talk about California politics, homeschool freedom, parental rights, and the family. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce, and thanks for joining us today. Let's jump right in and see what's going on here on the Front Line. Before I get into the battle in Brazil and some of the other things going on in the legislature here in California, I want to remind you about Homeschool Freedom Day coming up on September 12th. Homeschool Freedom Day is going to be an incredible opportunity to learn not just about homeschool freedom itself, but the history of our country's 250 years of freedom, and we're going to be talking about homeschool freedom in that context. This event is taking place at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, and we're going to have a great lineup of speakers. I hope you can be there. We have Zan Tyler coming. She's going to be talking about homeschool freedom, the history, some of the battles, as well as engagement in homeschool advocacy. And we have Will Estrada from Homeschool Legal Defense Association, who's also going to be talking about some of the threats we're facing, as well as the history of religious freedom and homeschool freedom. We have Robert Bortons from Classical Conversations, also talking about the current threats to homeschool freedom and the disaster that our country's education system has become, and how we can be engaged in taking back freedoms that have been lost, but also the threats that we face in our society when we look to government to be the answer. We also have Jennifer Avila coming to talk about the simple ways that you can make a difference by talking to legislators or their staff at your local district level, going and visiting district offices, right in your own communities. And we'll also have my wife Betsy speaking briefly about how you can be involved. Even if you have little kids at home, there are things that you can do to make a difference, even from your own home. So let's join together with other homeschool families. This is an event for the whole family. You can bring your kids, and it's an incredible opportunity, partly because of the event we're doing, but partly also because of the location. You'll be able to participate in our event as well as visit the museum, all for the same cost. You'll be able to have access to the 250th year celebration display that's special at the Reagan Library during this time. This is the last week of that special exhibit. So you'll be able to get all of those things for one price. And we're looking forward to this incredible opportunity. Check it out on our website, fpmca.org, and look at Homeschool Freedom Day that we are hosting, FPM and CHIA together. We hope to see you there September 12th. As it comes to the California legislature, we have had the legislature on break for the last couple of weeks. It does continue the next couple of weeks. They will be back in session on August 3rd. So in the meantime, we're reviewing a bunch of the things that the legislature did right before they went on recess. There's usually a bit of a cram right before they go on break, and so there's a month-long break. But right before, in June, they amended a bunch of bills. So we are reviewing some of that, including in that there is a bill that we got some amendment language in last year. It's in the process, still in the legislature, and this bill has to do with mandatory kindergarten. And because of our amendment language, this bill does not impact private school students or private homeschool students, because the way it's worded is it only affects students going into first grade in a public school. So it's mandating kindergarten for public school students, not for homeschool students. So two issues about this. One is we're grateful that the amendment language is in there and that we don't have to worry about this particular bill impacting homeschool freedom directly, immediately. But the other issue is that it does impact parental rights. Parents that want to put their kids in public school, it does immediately impact them because they are required under this bill, if it does pass, to put their kids in kindergarten before they're allowed to go into first grade. So it's the first time that a grade itself has actually been required in California, but there's a movement, a push. We fought this about 30 times in California, where they're trying to mandate earlier education in California. And really, there's a number of arguments, but the number one argument that's been coming up the last few years in the legislature by the sponsor of this bill, this movement, this mandatory kindergarten idea, the sponsor is the California Teachers Association, and the number one argument is kids entering into first grade in public schools can't stand in line. So we need to mandate kindergarten to make sure kids learn how to stand in line in kindergarten, so we're not having to still teach that in first grade. So that's a bill that's parked right now in the legislature. It's not moving right now. It's sitting there during the break, so it could pass at the end of the break this fall, the late summer. The other bill I wanted to mention that's in California is a bill that Governor Newsom signed that sort of changes the structure of the California Department of Education a bit. And I don't know fully how this is all going to work out practically, but the bill shifts some of the responsibilities of the state elected position of the superintendent of public instruction. And that bill was signed into law right before the break. And it's something that we need to be aware of. It doesn't directly impact homeschooling immediately, but the idea is that more authority and more of the practical outworking and the jobs in the world of education in California will fall under the purview and the review and the authority of the governor's office. They can't remove the superintendent position because it's an elected position in the state constitution. But he is trying to sort of shuffle around some of the responsibilities. So we don't quite know. We're still reviewing the bill and all the things that it indicates, but we're also not sure how it's going to play out, practically speaking, in the department. So those are a couple of things happening in California right now. I want to mention briefly the issue of Connecticut, Nebraska. Again, I know we've talked about this before, but those states, Nebraska and Connecticut, have recently passed tighter restrictions on homeschool freedom. And the group behind them, CRHE, which was the same group that pushed home inspections, mandatory teacher certification for homeschooling in California back in 2018, mandatory testing in 2018, mandatory state approved curriculum in 2018. That group, CRHE, was behind the Nebraska bill and the Connecticut bill, which tightened up restrictions on homeschool freedom, including in Nebraska, if there's any investigation into anybody in a home, that family cannot pull their kids out of public school to homeschool, even if it's a false allegation. If there's an investigation opened, nobody has to be charged. There just has to be an allegation and an investigation opened. If that happens, they can't pull their kids out of public school to homeschool. And in Connecticut, every person that wants to homeschool in Connecticut now has to do background check before they can apply to homeschool. They can't get permission from the state to homeschool unless they do a background check first. So it's kind of a new, we must prove our innocence before we're allowed to homeschool in Connecticut. That's a reversal of the basic freedoms that our country lives by. We don't believe in proving our own innocence. We believe in innocent until proven guilty, which has been completely flipped in Connecticut for those that want to homeschool. So those ideas are not limited to those states. The CRHE has said that those are a good starting point, but they're not the end point. They did not get what they wanted in those bills, but they believe that that's a good starting point toward responsible homeschool law in those states. So we can expect to see a lot more push for tighter restrictions on homeschooling, even than mandatory background checks. That's just the starting point from their perspective. So that's not isolated to those states. It's something that's being pushed nationwide in our country, and we can expect to see more of that push. And not only that, but we should expect to see not just the same kind of laws being pushed, but a broader array based on the Make Homeschool Safe Act, which is that model bill that CRHE has proposed that would have a broad range of new restrictions for homeschooling if they could get all of their ideas passed. So that's something that we need to be aware of. And it's another good reason to come back to the issue of getting involved in advocacy. And we will be talking about that and training about that at Homeschool Freedom Day on September 12th. So it would be great to have you there. Next, I want to point out that there's a family that you can pray for in Brazil. The parents have been put into prison for 50 days for neglecting their children. Specifically, the judge in this case, this is a homeschool family. The parents have been put in jail, put in prison for homeschooling. And the things that the judge pointed out specifically about what the children are being deprived of includes the fact that the kids like to listen to Christian music and classical music more than they like to listen to pop music. And the judge specifically pointed that out as a problem for these kids, and that the parents are neglecting their children. And that's why the kids don't like pop music more than they like Christian and classical music. So there's some statements made by the judge in this case that are pretty bizarre, but you can be praying for this family because they're separated right now. The parents are in prison and the kids have been removed from the parents' care. And this idea of neglect through these principles here that the court is saying are unreasonable is a direct defiance of God's design for the family. But also, even in our country, it would be considered unreasonable for the government to take those responsibilities away from parents simply because of the type of music their kids like to listen to. The other issue that the court another one of the issues that the court pointed to in this particular case is that the parents are keeping the girls in the family from exposure to the LGBT agenda, ideas, worldview that is more being pushed in the sex education programs in their country. So they're being looked at as too Christian, essentially, is what's going on in Brazil right now. So you can pray for the family, but pray for Brazil as a whole, and pray for the homeschool community in Brazil that they would look to God for hope, but also that they would have victory in this case as it gets appealed and as other people face threats of their own freedom and their ability to raise their kids in Brazil. So be praying for that. Pray for Homeschool Freedom Day here in California, and pray for the legislature as they come back August 3rd. Pray for us that as we review all the legislation that's being amended right now, or has been amended in June, as we're reviewing it now, that we would be prepared for their return in August. So thank you so much for watching. See you again next time. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Front Line with FPM. For more information about the topics we discuss here, check out Family Protection Ministries at fpmca.org and subscribe to our channel.